All right. Thanks, Mary. Hi, my name is Jack. I'm an alcoholic and an addict. My sobriety date is March 22nd, 2019. And I thought I would start off maybe about what sobriety has gotten me. Sometimes that kind of is at the end and what AA has, but I tend to ramble into like sometimes drunk-a-log territory. Um, yeah, so I went to an in-person meeting tonight and someone said something that it stuck with me. And I'm like, I felt like I need to share that. So I basically started drinking at 15 years old and it was fun. Um, and that was 1985. So when I got sober, it was 2019. So if you do the math, there was at 34 years or something like that, 35 years, whatever of basically drinking, not always alcoholically. And then about the last 19 years, I was also an opiate addict. And I say opiate because I never knowingly took heroin or fentanyl. I think I got some counterfeit pills, but pretty much I was a pharmaceutical type. And this person in the meeting today said, sobriety gave me my life back. And he goes, and he said this, he goes, but I was using and drinking for so long. He goes, I was 14. He goes, what life did I get back? He goes, he was like my age, around 50. And I thought about that. I'm like, yeah, sobriety didn't give me my life back. It gave me a new life, a life that I never knew existed. And it's been absolutely wonderful. And so many aspects of it I understand are different because of the pandemic. This Zoom universe of sobriety and secular AA that has just totally exploded has absolutely had an impact on my recovery. Along with in person, I had almost 1 year to the day when the lockdown started, and I was supposed to be giving my my first lead at 1 year of sobriety, and the meeting got shut down. So a week later, I gave my first lead on Zoom, and it was like, and we didn't know what Zoom was, and it was basically just the folks that was part of my local group here. And then through word of mouth and people finding things that the Zoom world took off. And I would say I probably got, 1,000 more meetings under my belt because of Zoom, especially when things were very much locked down and these meetings were opening up in Ireland, the West Coast. I was like in so excited and so much in love with the idea of hearing new people, but at the same time relating to a lot of their stories. That there's a wonderful person in Toronto that many of us know, and her story is the same as many of ours. Here in Cleveland, there are folks in Ireland and England that I heard the struggles and the things they went through, and it inspired my own recovery. I would have never gotten that, if it wasn't for Zoom. Also wouldn't have gotten it if there wasn't a pandemic. So I wrestle with that in my mind, if not a single person, would have died from COVID, how selfish of me to say I could, give all this back like it never happened. In my mind, I think I would have to do that, even though it's been so great for me. I feel I would have to do that. Yeah, so sobriety has given me a fellowship that I didn't realize I was missing till I had it. It did start in person and it grew so, tenfold in all over the world from Zoom. And that fellowship is something that I had, last time I had it was probably from like 1991 to 96 when I was in the Air Force. And I think that was military driven. You're with a group of people that, and I was in during peacetime. I joined in the first Gulf War, came and went, and before I even went to basic training. And, by the time my enlistment was over with, it was 1996, 9/11 had never happened yet, but there's still a fellowship about that. You're going through, whether it's basic training or I lived in Okinawa, Japan for 3 years, so you're living there and you're homesick for your food, the food you're used to eating, your friends. This was pre-internet. There was, I had to actually like write my mom letters. I couldn't just text her, or I could spend $3 a minute calling her from Japan, So there was a fellowship to that. And then, when I got out, in the longest time, I was a binge drinker, very much a person who had the typical one is too many, a thousand's not enough. If I could go Monday through Friday without drinking, but Saturday I was off, I knew what was in store for the evening. It was get as fucked up, as fast and as deep as I could, and then Sunday was a wasted day because it's like you gave that up. You knew that's what Saturday night meant. It meant Sunday was going to be a day where you're sick. And I started my wife and I got married when I was 20. So before I even went into the Air Force at 21 years old, she was pregnant, and I had all three of my children were born before I was 26. So, you're partying till late, drinking. And there were times my wife we would do that together, although she seemed to have an off switch. She knew when there was enough for that night, but the next day, you got 2 kids in diapers and one on the way, and you're just fucking hungover and you're miserable. So alcohol certainly was affecting my life in that way. But once I got out of the military, I certainly lost the fellowship, but I didn't know I lost it. And I didn't know, I guess I needed it. I had good friends, and I had, I ended up eventually moving back to the Cleveland area, which is where I was raised, other than a few times I moved around. My sophomore year of high school, I lived in Los Angeles. My mother and father got divorced, and she moved out here with my stepfather, and I came for 1 year. So I moved around a little bit, but, I settled in a job. I was in charge of a department. I learned a skill. I became an electrician in the Air Force. So that's like my core job skill set as an industrial electrician. And I had friends and I had coworkers, but I didn't realize it wasn't a fellowship. Now, that doesn't mean not having a fellowship caused me to become a pill junkie and an alcoholic. But I remember moments during, especially when my addiction was really bad, when I was probably in my late 30s, early 40s, and it was the worst right up at the very end, where I'm like, God, if I could pick up a hobby, maybe this would occupy my mind and occupy my time to keep me from always turning to drugs, and alcohol. And the alcohol was always there, but really, the drive to stay, under the influence of oxys, Vicodin, any of those wonderful pharmaceutically driven opiates. That was my drug of choice. Nothing like popping a few Percocet and washing them down with some cheap vodka I bought at the corner gas station. That was a wonderful way to start my day. And then as soon as you realize you're out of them, then the chase is on to score them again. And it was a terrible existence, and it was exhausting. So I wanted out of that. And I thought if I found some sort of hobby, or I volunteered someplace, even though I was an alcoholic and an addict, I don't think I was a shitty person. I had a lot of empathy for people. I worked on a lot of things, resentments. Even though I didn't know anything about recovery or that type of program, I worked on resentments I had for my mother moving me to California when I was in the 10th grade, and I was starting to have relations with females, and I was starting to party with my friends, and she uprooted me. I was fucking pissed about that till I was, you know, in my early 30s. I was still hanging on to that, but I was able to, you know, even though I was in active addiction, I worked through a lot of that stuff. And I thought if I could just find something to bond with, I could put this stupid addiction on the back burner, on the side burner. But no, as soon as I started feeling better, you know, if I couldn't score anything and I'd go through the withdrawals, and you would think, oh, I made it through the withdrawals, you know, 3-5 days, just don't do them anymore. No, I would get a text or a call from somebody that they got resupplied, and I couldn't wait to get there and get them. And if I didn't have the money, I would try and get it fronted, and I would worry about how I could pay for it later. A lot of it meant diverting my family's money. I often say that my wife probably thought everybody at the company I worked at had a kid with cancer, because I was always needing to take out $100 for the donation to pass, you know, when they passed the hat. You know, it seemed like once a month I was going to need to take out $100 out of our savings account for that. And none of that was true. Or, you know, I was in the position of being able to order any of the parts or components for my department. Well, a lot of those items got diverted to Craigslist. You know, I guess what I'm getting at is I was running that cycle of this second life. I had a very suburban existence with kids. My wife and I both part of the PTA and athletic boosters and all that bullshit. But then when I left for work in the morning, I became, you know, how am I going to get high and drunk that day? And the last 5 years, that was very much intense. And I had hated who I became. I was full of shame that I kept pushing those lines, like I'll never cross this line. And then I would cross the line. Borrowing money from subordinates, guys in my department, whom I made, you know, a decent amount more than them. And I'm hitting them up for $200 so that I can, because somebody texted me that they got a script in, you know, and I couldn't let somebody else buy that. I had to fucking go get it. Yeah. So, you know, my bottom was I was just at the end of my rope. I finally came clean to my wife. I went to see a therapist, find out from the therapist, why do I enjoy this second life, this secret life so much? And he goes, well, you're an addict, you're an alcoholic. That's what they do. And I went to this therapist under the influence, and he goes, you know, he called me out. He goes, you're high right now and you're drunk. I'm like, yeah. He goes, you need to go to detox. He goes, if you're serious about wanting to solve this, because you need to go to detox. And he goes, and you need to tell your wife what's going on. So that night I went home. I'd seen him later in the afternoon, and I said, look, you know, I drink too much and you think it's drinking. I said, but for close to 20 years, I've also been a drug addict. You know, and the last 6 months, not only were the opiates involved, but it was cocaine was also involved. You know, that became my new favorite drug: pills, coke, and vodka. It was, you know, I thought it was, you know, the trifecta. But the second I consumed them, I was overwhelmed with shame and guilt for what I had let myself begin, that I couldn't control myself anymore. And I was sleeping in the basement of my own home. My wife and I had become roommates. She thought I was having extramarital affairs, and I wasn't doing it with the opposite sex, but I was having an affair with drugs. The pills were my mistress. That's who I was texting in the middle of the night. It was the plug to see if I could get something. It was, you know, the guys in my department, I would be texting them at 4 a.m. saying, hey, I'm not coming in, because I knew I was going to be dope sick that day. You know, and that life was just completely exhausting and miserable. So I went to detox. And from detox, they said, well, what are you gonna, you know, they threw me on some Suboxone. They threw me on some other drugs to kind of take me down, you know, so I wouldn't go into alcohol withdrawals, because this time I was a a daily alcoholic with anytime I could score pills or Coke, I was doing that on top of it. And that's usually started about 5:30 in the morning. So I would be at work by 6 a.m. So I can make my 7 o'clock staff meetings. And at the end of detox, you're like, what are you going to do? And I'm like, what do you mean when I do it? Like, you can walk out of here yourself. You brought yourself here. Or we would highly recommend you go to rehab. So I went to a rehab and I spent 30 days in rehab, and it absolutely turned my life around. One, it just gave me a timeout from my existence. And I'm very grateful that I was able to do that. I realize that not everybody can do it. Not everybody has the medical insurance. Not everybody has the ability to leave their family. By this time, my children were all in their 20s. I have a 31-year-old son, a 29-year-old daughter, and a 27-year-old daughter right now. So when I got sober, they were already college graduates and they were on their career. So, dad got to go away, and it really didn't, so I'm grateful. And I understand that that was a special circumstance that not many people have. And I have to remind myself that a lot, that it's just not easy for people to uproot their lives and just go to rehab. So I kind of am cautious when I say, well, why don't you go to rehab? Because, some people just can't do it, and they have to come to meetings to do it. And when I got out of rehab, I looked up the local Cleveland Central office, because I at this time, by the time I was 18 or 19, I knew I was atheist, agnostic, secular, whatever you want to call it. I was raised Lutheran, but I was done with it. We never got our kids baptized. My wife and I are kind of on the same page with that. And the rehab I went to was very good as far as saying, hey, the higher power can be whatever you want. They offered alternate 10 steps. They offered alternate traditions. I believe probably some of the books we talk about here, the Jeffrey Munn books, were available if you wanted them. So they were very conducive to me feeling and believing that I could get sober without having a God in my life. So I found Westside Agnostics, which happens to be on the west side of Cleveland, thus the name. And when I walked into that first meeting on a Saturday morning, it was about 80 people, in-person meeting. I was fresh out of rehab. I was definitely riding a pink cloud. That month break from my life and clean cut, changed my phone number, deleted everybody in my phone that I used to get. They couldn't contact me. I couldn't contact them. All the stuff they tell you to do in rehab and get to a meeting. I was on board with that. I am like, I'm feeling so great. I got to keep this going. And when I walked into that meeting, I saw people from every race. I saw people of identifying of every gender. I saw people that, as far as their class in life, were homeless, maybe, to lawyers and doctors, and everybody was in that meeting, enjoying each other, getting something out of it, feeling like I genuinely felt the energy of recovery in that meeting, and I was hooked. And that's been one of my home groups, I say now. I went to one of the meetings tonight in person. I don't get there as often anymore, but with 4 years sobriety, I don't necessarily feel like I have to make every in-person meeting. I try to go a couple times a month, but certainly this meeting is, I consider, a home group. When you folks see me, I'm at work, not the job that I was at, Active Addiction. This job I'm at now is a gift of sobriety. I was about 3 months sober, and I realized I needed to leave the place I was at, even though I'd been there 20 years, over 20 years, because I knew it fell under the rules of sober people, sober places. I used and drank at that company so much. It was a constant reminder. And many of the people I sourced my narcotics from were employees or aunts or uncles of guys that worked in the production departments. I had to get away from that. I just couldn't be there. And I had some resentments in the direction the company was going. But, once I've reevaluated that, I realized that my resentments were more that the company was changing in ways that was going to impact my ability to drink and do drugs on the job. And it bothered me. And I kind of had lost some power. And I'm like, you know what? I don't want to be here anyways because I can't drink or use because it'll kill me if I go back to doing that. And I'm pissed at some people in upper management just because I was pissed. And I started sending out resumes and I was scared as fuck. I landed at this place. I'm a building engineer at a data center. So basically my job is to take care of all the electrical systems and the cooling systems. Pretty much my job is to make sure the servers have electricity and they stay cool. It's man, God, it has to be manned 24/7. So occasionally I'm on night shift. When I'm on night shift, I visit everybody here at an all night place. And I really, really consider this, as much of a home group as my West Side Agnostics home group. It just that place has a little bit more history because I went there in person. Yeah, so there was a bit of recognizing in myself that I think I am predisposed, whether it's genetics or not, to addiction. I've shared in different times in this meeting that I remember being like 6, 7 years old and my mother taking me to the dentist. And back then in the 70s, they used to give you laughing gas. And, before they get, a little kid, they give you some laughing gas, put a little thing in your nose and fucking make you high as, nitrous oxide, whippets, basically big tank of whippets. And I love that shit. And I remember driving home and asking my mom if we could buy some of that to have at home. And, I look back at that now and I realize that my brain likes to be altered. It is just a fact. And one way or another, I was going to do it. Alcohol was the easy route. I was encouraged to drink by my father and my grandfather. They were blue collar steel workers. Cleveland's a Rust Belt city, and you drank hard, you worked hard. By the time you were 15 or 16, I remember all the stories my dad told back in high school about how he was fucking getting hammered with his boys and getting laid, and that's what I expect out of my son. So when I started drinking at 15 or 16, it was not frowned upon. That's what you're supposed to do. So that was never an issue. So alcohol came easy. I had some insecurities. It's hard to tell on Zoom, but I am a very short individual. That's first time I see people in real life and they've only seen me on Zoom. They're like, oh my God, Jack, you're so short. And so I had a lot of insecurities growing up. I was always the shortest guy out of my group. I changed schools after my parents got divorced. I went from 7th grade till I graduated high school. I went to a different school every year. And alcohol was the great equalizer. If you could party and you could be funny, that was one of my fallbacks is humor. It didn't matter where you were at in life. It was a fun time. And it just came easy. And when the opportunity came in my 30s to start acquiring opiates, I never had an injury to get them. My father, funny enough, had a few knee surgeries and he started saying, you're working hard, have a couple of these for the weekend. Well, then it became, I really like those, Dad. Well, I know somebody you can buy them. And then that led to a 20-year cycle of sourcing them. People came and went. Sometimes, some old grandma I would get it through would die, or her doctor would cut her off or something. But I always had a network of, a half dozen people, and I knew when their scripts were coming due that I would buy from. But I was always a willing participant. The first time those pills were put in my hand, I was like, yes, I want to try these. And then it was like, oh, you're not supposed to drink. Well, maybe drink a little bit. So I would say within a month of me getting them, The, the label, don't drink while you're these. I was like, oh no, you definitely want to drink on these. That's where I went. And I still have to watch that in my sobriety. I latch on to things that give me pleasure, and hang on to them, addictively. A good thing that I've started doing is I started picking up books again. I'm not physically reading them, but I'm listening to them. And as soon as I finish one, I'm starting another one. I'm at the point that I can't go 2 days without not having an audiobook going when I'm making my rounds here at work, when I'm making my checks. Getting my fucking steps in. I got, where's Fitbit? At, nonstop. And so I'm addicted to that. I'm addicted to the feeling that gives me of accomplishment. I'm addicted to people liking the memes I post. Yeah, I like a lot of that approval side of things. Anything that can give me a little bit of a dopamine fix, that's not drugs or alcohol, I'm pretty on board with. So yeah, anyways, I appreciate all of you for being here. I appreciate this meeting more than you guys know. And I really am grateful for you all to be here. And with that, thank you so much, Mary, for asking me. Great. See y'all. Peace.